Welcome to Left Undone, Incomplete Investigations. I'm back with Carrie. This is part 2 of the Deoor Kunz case. And Carrie is our Left Undone expert, Left Undone channel expert on this case. She's done a lot of research on it. How is my signal, Carrie? Now can you see me and hear me?
Yeah, it's good now.
Okay, good. We had a little bit of IT issues, and we are not the IT department. So, but I think somehow we fixed it. I don't think we've really fixed it. I think it fixed itself. But anyways, so we were talking about little missing Deoor Kunz, who went missing he was 2 years old when he went missing from Idaho Falls, Idaho. And that was in 2015. He was with his mom, his dad, his great-grandpa's buddy on a camping trip and just vanished, according to them. They called 911 and Deorr was never found, and it is now 2021. So if you missed part 1, well, go back and watch part 1 where we introduced the case and talked about it, and we were going through the timeline and all the players were already introduced. All right, so Carrie, where we were was we were talking about the search, and then the searchers said the whole thing seemed off, and Jessica and Vernal, the parents, had written statements, and then they were going to go into that. We were going to go into that, their written statements. Do you know anything about the written statements?
Yeah, I actually have copies of the written statements.
Do you really?
Oh. Yeah. I'm like, I'm about to lose them. Yeah, I do. They're right here.
I'm interrupting here for a minute. I think this would be a good time to play the 911 call from Jessica.
14:28 4 seconds, July 10, 2015.
What's the address of your emergency?
I'm actually camping in Ledworth, just outside of Ledworth.
Uh-huh.
My 2-year-old son, we can't find him.
What's your name?
Jessica.
Jessica who?
Mitchell.
How long has he been missing?
About an hour.
An hour?
Yeah.
Are you by water?
Yes.
Okay, stay on the phone with me, okay?
Okay.
I'm going to put you on hold. John? I need... Do you know which campground you're in? What?
Timber Creek.
Pardon me?
It's Stone Reservoir, Timber Creek.
Stone Reservoir?
Yeah, or Timber Creek.
Hold on. We need search and rescue. Jessica? Jessica?
Yeah.
What's your son's name?
Or
What is it?
Deorr. O-R-R.
What's his first name?
That's his first name. Deorr.
Oh. B-O-R-R?
O-R.
Just O-R-R? Okay. What is he wearing?
He was wearing cowboy boots, a blue pair, like pajama pants, and a camel jacket. And he's got shaggy blonde hair.
How tall is he? Hello?
I'm not exactly sure how to give it up.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay. Is your husband calling too?
Like, all down where we were camping at, and we can't find him at all.
Okay. Hang on. Do you know how far outside of Ledworth you are? What?
It's the turn off right after, like, the general store and the post office. in Ledore, and it's at Timber Creek.
As you're going up over the pass?
If you're in Ledore and you're at the gas station, you take the street on the left-hand side, right across the street from the gas station, and go straight out that street.
Is it a paved road?
No.
Okay, as you're headed towards Ledore, you take a right on the street across the street from the gas station.
It would be a left.
A left.
Yeah. And there's a sign that says Timber Creek and
Okay,
stuff like that.
and you're gonna from Idaho Falls.
Yeah.
Okay. Hang on just a second. She said you take a left on the street just past the gas station as you're coming in from Idaho Falls, and it says Timber Creek. Okay. Okay, we need you to stay within cell service. We've got people going on the way.
Thank you.
Wait a minute. And you keep us updated with anything that's going on, okay?
Okay.
All right. Don't go away from cell service.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Jessica.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And then the searchers said the whole thing seemed off. And Jessica and Vernal, the parents, had written statements. And then they were going to go into that. We were going to go into that, the written statements. Do you know anything about the written statements?
Yeah, I actually have copies of the written statements.
Do you really?
Oops.
No.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm about to lose them. Yeah, I do. They're right here. Yeah, I don't know if you want me to read it word for word or what do you want me to do?
Do you have anything highlighted? Is there any? Is it really long? I mean, it's up to you.
Okay, can you still hear me? Because you're froze again.
I can hear you fine. I can hear you and see you.
Okay, because I can barely hear you. You're a copy.
No,
But if you can hear me fine, I guess okay.
Go for it.
I decided to just go ahead and read this because I was able to print out a clean copy that I can read because it was hard for Carrie to read it with the printing and it's long. So I'm going to go ahead and just interrupt her. We pre-recorded her reading, but I'm going to read it to you. So this is Jessica's statement on Wednesday, which would be July 8th. On Wednesday, little man and I spent the day at our apartment cleaning, watching movers, and hanging out. Around 3 p.m., my mom called me and asked if I could come to the house to help her move stuff from her camper to my grandpa's camper because she couldn't do it with her ankle. Little man and I drove to my mom's house, and I started to help my grandpa, mom, and stepdad move things out of the camper while little man played in the yard next to the campers. As I was helping my mom and grandpa, my mom asked me what mine, Deorr, and little man's plans were for the weekend. I told her we didn't have any plans. She asked me if I would like to go camping to watch my grandpa because I took care of him as his CNA for almost a year. I know the signs of him being low on oxygen. I told her that I wanted to go, but I needed to talk to Deorr about it. Deorr is Vernal, her man, not the baby. He's a junior, FYI. That's when my grandpa told me about his friend that was going to be going too. He's a little odd, but he's a good guy, is what he said. My mom told me that her and my stepdad were going to be busy Friday and Saturday, but they were planning on coming up on Sunday. To help get stuff packed up and to hang out for a bit before we all headed home. After helping my mom, I loaded little man up in my car and we went back home. We then had dinner with my aunt and cousins while Deorr was at work. When Deorr got home, I told him that my mom would like us to go camping with my grandpa and his friend to make sure my grandpa was okay. He's got COPD and is on oxygen. Deorr then told me he was already planning on going to Montpelier to go cut wood for his dad for the winter. We had a bit of an issue agreeing on what we were going to do. Deorr was hesitant on going camping because he wanted to do something else that weekend. And she goes into Thursday, July 9th. Morning. I was woken up by someone knocking on our door and our dog barking. Deorr got up and answered the door, and it was my grandpa. I got up, and he asked me if we are going camping with him and if I could head over to my mom's house so we could make a list of stuff we needed to get. I told him I would get me and little man ready and be right over. At that time, Deorr was getting ready to go help his boss, Jake, in Blackfoot. I got myself and my son ready, and we drove to my mom's house. When we got there, my grandpa and I wrote out a list of the things I needed to get at the store. My grandpa handed me some money, and little man and I got in the car and drove to Albertsons on 17th Street. Then we did all of our grocery shopping. We took all of the groceries to my mom's house, and I put all of the groceries in the camper, my grandpa's Suburban, and the coolers. Then my grandpa gave me some more money to go get some ice and a few more things from Smith's and Maverick. Little man and I went to Smith's, and then we went to Maverick's to get ice and smokes. We drove to my mom's house and unloaded the groceries and ice out of my car and into the camper, coolers, and Suburban. I went into the house to tell my grandpa that I had gotten everything packed up and that we were going to go home to wait for Deorr to get home so we could leave. My grandpa said we should all just meet back at my mom's house so Deorr could help him get the camper hooked up to his Suburban and we could follow him to pick up his friend Isaac. Little man and I went home. I gave him some lunch, changed his diaper, packed our clothes and things to go, and watched a movie until Deorr got home. When Deorr got home, I loaded our stuff, little man, and some wood into Deorr's truck. Then we headed over to my mom's house where Deorr helped my grandpa hook up the camper. We followed my grandpa over to Isaac's house, and when Isaac came out of his house, he had a black trunk sitting on the sidewalk that he put into the back of Deorr's truck. Isaac then got into my grandpa's Suburban with my grandpa and Deorr, our son, and I followed in Deorr's truck. We stopped at the KJ's gas station on Broadway to fill one of the camper tires. Deorr got out of the truck to see if my grandpa needed help. Then he went into the store while little man and I stayed in the truck. After the tire was filled, he got on the road and headed towards Leodore. My grandpa's Suburban and camper started swaying really bad after a couple of miles. My grandpa pulled over. Deorr got out of the truck to see what was going on and then moved his truck so that he could put the camper on his truck because my grandpa's Suburban was overheating. We then continued on towards Leodore. And just before we got into Mud Lake, our truck started to overheat. So we pulled off into this parking lot where they dump a lot of sand and red salt. My grandpa and Deorr got the camper hooked back up to the Suburban, and Deorr went into the camper and realized I had packed everything towards the back of the camper, so he moved stuff around so it wasn't making the camper sway so bad. Then he continued on to Mud Lake. We got to the little gas station, and Deorr and Isaac both went in to grab a few things. Deorr came out with 2 drinks and a mini pizza. I gave a piece to little man to hold him over until he got to the campground, and Deorr and I had the rest. We got back on the road, and when we got into Leodore, we stopped at the restaurant bar to get some dinner because it was getting dark, and my grandpa said we still had a little ways to go. My grandpa, Isaac, Deorr, got out of the vehicles and started walking towards the restaurant while I was getting little man out of the car seat. By the time little man and I started walking across the street, Deorr was headed back towards the truck saying it was closed. So I loaded little man back up into the car seat and we followed Isaac and my grandpa. We drove for about 45 minutes to an hour before we found a campground. We stopped. Deorr and my grandpa set the camper up off the Suburban, and I got little man out of the truck. I went in the camper and organized things and got my grandpa's bed ready so he wasn't doing it in the dark. Then I got our Deorr little man's bed set up in the back of the Suburban. I got little man changed into pajamas and a new diaper. Deorr took the diaper and put it in a grocery bag and hung it up in the tree. We then sat by the fire. Isaac and my grandpa went in and went to bed. And little man, Deorr, and I sat by the fire and looked up at the stars until we decided it was time for bed. Then we all got into the back of the Suburban and fell asleep. Then she goes into July 10th. Friday morning, we were awakened by the door being flown open and Isaac saying, "Wakey, wakey, eggs and bakey." Deorr, little man, and I woke up. I changed little man's diaper while Deorr got out of the Suburban. We all started talking about breakfast, so we started a fire and I got breakfast started. Deorr, Isaac, and my grandpa were sitting around the fire and little man was following me around with his cup and blanket in his hands. Little man kept getting really close to the fire with his blanket and kept tripping. So I took his blanket and put it in the Suburban with the rest of our things. After that, when I went to the bathroom, I realized that I had started my period and didn't have anything. So I told Deorr we needed to go to the store ASAP. After we got done with breakfast and cleanup, I told my grandpa that we were going back to town. He handed me $50 and said, "Get whatever you need and get some candy." So Deorr, little man, and I got into Deorr's truck and we drove to town. On the side here, it says, my grandpa told us he wanted us back by 4 p.m. It's very hard to read that. I'll have to look at that closer. But anyway, so grandpa said, get whatever you need and get some candy. So Deorr, little man, and I got into Deorr's truck and we drove to town. On the way to town, Deorr told me he wanted to stop somewhere to get some more diesel in his truck. It was a new truck, so we didn't know if the fuel gauge was correct or not. So when we got to Deorr, we stopped at the stage stop where they told him where he could get diesel. We drove 2 buildings down from the stage stop, and Deorr went across the street to the hotel to pay for diesel. When he came back to the truck, he told me their pumps were broken, but there was a place called Patterson Welding that has diesel. Deorr got directions to Patterson Welding, and we headed down the yard on a road with nothing but houses. I asked him the directions. He told me the directions, and I told him that he needed to turn around because the post office he mentioned was behind us. After we turned around, we found the correct road. We found Peterson Welding, and Deorr went in. He came out with a guy that told us to drive to the back of the building. We drove around back where their pumps were, and Deorr and the guy talked a while, filling up the tank. After getting diesel, we drove back to the stage stop gas station. I took little man out of his car seat and carried him to the store. I found tampons, the candy my grandpa wanted, and then I helped little man pick out his candy. We stood at the counter and Deorr asked if we were hungry. We decided to order some potato wedges. While we were waiting for them to cook, I noticed there was an older man that was watching little man really close, and the look he was giving him worried me. After we got our potato wedges, Deorr talked to a guy in the store that was driving a semi. After we paid for our stuff, I asked Deorr if he could take little man so I could use the bathroom. I went in the bathroom, and when I came out, I saw Deorr and little man outside. I went outside and Deorr was on the phone with someone as he was putting our stuff in the truck. I picked little man up and walked around to the passenger side of the truck and put him in his car seat. I gave him some potato wedges and he had a cup of Krispy Kreme donut holes and a small bag of Swedish fish. I opened his Swedish fish and we headed back towards the campground. When we were driving up the road going towards the campground, little man was in the back and he kept saying, "Bad fishy." And Deorr looked back and said, "What did that fishy ever do to you?" And we all started laughing. When we got closer to the campground, I noticed my grandpa and Isaac in the Suburban pulling into the campground. We followed them into the camp. Deorr got out of the truck while I got little man out of his car seat and out of the truck. I got the bag of candy out of the truck and carried the candy and handed the candy my grandpa wanted to him. And he said, "You're late. It's 10 after 1. Okay, so clearly that part that I couldn't read was he wanted them back by 1, not 4. That was my bad. "You're late. It's 10 after 1. I told you to be back by 1. I laughed at him and walked back to the truck to put the bag on the front board. When I started walking back, I heard my grandpa and Deorr talking about fishing, how when we were gone, him and Isaac went to the reservoir and they caught fish in the creek. Deorr and I didn't believe him, and I told him I wanted to fish, but there was no way they caught fish in that creek. We sat around by the fire pit for a few minutes, maybe 10 to 15, and then I decided I wanted to see if I could catch anything in the creek. I grabbed a fishing pole out of my grandpa's Suburban and a container of worms. I asked little man if he was tired and he was ready to take his nap, and he said, "Yeah." So I looked at my grandpa and asked him if it was okay if I left little man with him. He said yes, and then looked at Isaac, who was talking to Deorr, and told him to show Deorr and I where they were fishing in the creek and caught the fish. We started walking up the path towards the upper campground, and we noticed little man was following us. So Deorr and I stopped, and Deorr asked him, "Do you want to go with us or stay with Grandpa Bob?" And little man replied, "No, yes," and turned around and walked back towards my grandpa, who was sitting in a camp chair by the fire looking/watching us. Deorr and I turned back around and started walking with Isaac again. After a few steps, I turned around, walking backwards to check to make sure little man didn't change his mind again and wasn't following us. When I saw him, he had his back toward me and was walking towards my grandpa. He was right next to a big rock, right by the picnic table in the campground. I turned back around and continued to walk with Deorr and Isaac until Isaac stopped and pointed down to the creek in different places. He said, "We were fishing here, and here." And then Isaac turned around and started walking in the direction of the campground. Deorr and I went down to the creek to look for any fish. We walked along the creek and saw a log that we could walk along. So Deorr and I walked across the log. That's when I noticed our dog Missy was with us, trying to walk along the log, trying to get to us. I walked back towards the creek bed and started walking along the creek again with Deorr following. As I walked along the creek, I kept looking towards the campground and saw my grandpa. I didn't see my son, but I figured he was laying in his double camping chair. Deorr and I continued to look at the creek and found out that we could walk across some rocks to a middle section of land where the creek split. We crossed the rocks and walked along. We stopped to a section of the creek where there was some downed trees and some brush that was closing off some of the water flow. As Deorr and I stood there, we saw some minnows, and Deorr said, "Goobs would love to see this." He then turned around and headed towards a tree that was across the creek. I put down my container of worms and fishing pole. I put a worm on the hook and threw the line in. I cast out my line a few times in the distance, I could hear Deorr's voice talking to somebody. I figured he was talking to our son, Little Man, or my grandpa. I turned around to see if Deorr and Little Man were behind me. And when I turned to look back at the fishing line, I saw something out of the corner of my eye move. When I turned my head to the right, I saw Isaac with a fishing pole and a tackle box. At that point, I heard Deorr behind me yell. I turned to look at him, and he said, "Goobs is gone. We can't find him." I said, "What?" And he repeated what he said. By then, panic set in, and I threw down the fishing pole and started running towards the rocks I could walk across. Once I got across the rocks, I ran up to the bank to Deorr. When I got to Deorr, he said, "Your grandpa doesn't know where Goob is." I started glancing around the campground to see if I could see Little Man, and then started walking towards my grandpa. When I got to my grandpa, I asked him where he last saw Little Man, and he then pointed over to a tree and said he was right there, sitting in the dirt, playing with his boots. Deorr then started to search around the campground and yelling his name and nicknames. I started walking around the campground and down by the creek looking for Little Man. After searching the creek, Deorr and I decided it was time we called 911. As we were searching a little bit more, we got to the upper campground, and I thought I heard Little Man say, "Mama," and I took off up the hill to see if I could see him. When I couldn't see him, I went down the hill towards Deorr, and we finally decided that it was definitely time to call 911. Deorr said he was going to drive down the road so that he could get service. I walked back to the campground and grabbed Little Man's blanket and pushed it in our dog Missy's face while Deorr went down the road. When I told Missy to go find Little Man, she took off towards the creek where I followed her. She took me along the creek and then back up to the campground, where she then took off down the road towards where Deorr went. I checked the camper and Suburban for Little Man with no results. I then decided that I needed to check the creek some more. When I came back from the creek, Deorr came up the road asking me if I had found him yet. I told him no. He started searching the area again. After about 5 to 10 minutes of searching, Deorr said he was really going to call 911. When he left, I tried to call my mom to see if I could make a call and for her to understand me. I tried to call her 5 times before the call went through. When my mom answered, I told her Little Man was missing and we couldn't find him. She couldn't understand me because I was crying and panicked. So she yelled at me and told me to calm down so she could understand me. When I told her what was going on, she told me that I needed to call 911. I hung up with her and called 911. The dispatcher was going on, and she told me my husband was on the other line with them. When I was done talking to her, I took everything out of my pockets and threw them in Deorr's truck on the passenger seat. When I got out of the truck and started heading towards the creek, I almost ran into Isaac. He was coming up from the creek with his fishing pole and tackle box. When he saw me, he asked me what was going on, and I said, "My son is missing. Have you seen him?" And he looked past my right shoulder and replied, "No," and walked around me towards the fire pit. I thought it was strange that he didn't seem to care or even look at me, but I headed back to the creek to check the water again. I figured if Little Man saw where his dad and I were, he might have tried to get to us and fallen in the creek. I continued to check the creek and most things around the water until I heard a 4-wheeler or something pull up in the campground. After the engine sound stopped, I heard voices talking, and I got out of the creek and started to walk towards the campground. When I got to the campground, Deorr was talking to a man from Search and Rescue who introduced himself as Ray. He asked us details of where the last place was that we saw our son and where we were when he went missing. He told us that he would like to have us search all of the vehicles and campers again to double check. He also asked us to stay in the campground so no one would have to go searching for us. Shortly after that, Lemhi County police officers and more search and rescue officers started to show up.
I said I also have his written statement. His is not as long as hers.
Hers was pretty long, but it was good. It was important and I have it up on the screen here as well. Do we want to read his? Or
Yeah, I can read it. It's not his is not nearly as long, so his will be easier to read, and it's actually like printed, so I can read it because you couldn't read
okay.
his handwriting.
Oh, hers
Hers,
was
I
her
couldn't read part of
handwriting?
hers.
Okay.
Yeah, hers is her handwriting, but sometimes part of it was hard. But his
Okay.
is like printed because when you looked at his handwriting, you couldn't make anything out.
Okay.
Deour Kunz, aka Verno, written letter. On July 10th, I woke up in Bob's Suburban that Jessica, my son, and I had stayed in for the night. I woke up later than Jessica and my son. It was around 8 a.m. I got up and everyone was around the fire pit Bob, Isaac, Jessica, and son. I got out and offered to start cooking breakfast. I kept having to remind Jessica to keep a hold of little Deorr. He wanted to be with me but didn't want him by the fire pit. We ate and sat around the campfire talking about the day. My son was playing with the family dog Missy by the truck, and my son was wanting to untie the dog. She was tied up because she kept trying to bite Isaac. We all stayed around camp. Jessica told me she needed us to go into later. She needed tampons, so I told her I'll warm up my guessing the word was Cummins or Cummins is what it says. And we got everyone some everyone some candy. Everyone said they wanted, and I wanted a Rockstar energy drink. So we loaded my son and bucketed him in his car seat. Bob said to try and be back by 11 a.m. So we headed down to town. It's about 45-minute drive, 8 miles. First thing we did when we went to town was look for a station that has diesel fuel to top off my truck. We seen a sign just in town that said diesel. So I pulled into the sign, and the sign said card only. We only had cash, but it said to go to Lador a street. So I did. The guy told me they were out of diesel, but Peterson machine. I told him thanks, I had fuel, but didn't know the area. Didn't want to run out. We got directions, but took the wrong turn. Past the old post office to a dirt driveway, turned around and went back and found Peterson. And I went in the office, found a redhead guy and 5'9", middle aged, said he had fuel. Met him around back, so I drove around back. He topped off my truck, and I paid him, gave him the change, and the three of us went down the road to Stage Stop and just got what she needed. My son picked out his Swedish fish, and I grabbed him a bigger bag. I grabbed my Rockstar at the back of the store, and we went to the register, all three of us, and the cashier, a short, heavy-set Hispanic woman, said she was going to be right there. She was cooking potato wedges. I told Jessica we should get us some, and my son wanted this Krispy Kreme donut cup. So I bought it and waited for her to cook our potato wedges. I was talking to a few people behind us in line. One was a Budweiser truck driver. Another was a truck driver from Utah, trucking, I think. And the other man was in a booth staring at us. He was looking down whenever I looked at him. Jessica paid the cashier and said she was going to the restroom. I said I'd put our son and our stuff in the truck. I buckled him in and gave him a potato wedge and a few donut balls, and we waited for Jessica. She came out and was headed back to the camp. And we headed back to the camp after a few miles. Goob, my son, asked for his fishes. Jessica opened the bag and gave it to him. He and I were teasing each other and laughing. We pulled up to camp, and Bob and Isaac were just pulling in the Suburban. We all got out. Jessica passed out the candy they wanted. Bob sat down by the fire, and then Isaac did then. Jessica and my son. I asked Bob if they were going up to the reservoir, and where it was. He said they just came from there, and there wasn't other people fishing, and they had fished in the creek by camp. Jessica wanted to fish. I told her there is no way there are fish in Shallow Creek. Bob said yes, there is, and told Isaac to show us. He pulled out a bag that had, I think, 7 fish in it, and I said, "Those are in there?" He said, "Yes, I'll show you where we fished," and stood up. Jessica said, "I want to go and ask Bob to watch our son." He said, "Yeah," and it was around my son's nap time, noonish. He was sitting in his favorite chair, a double camp chair. He lays in it normally, so 3 of us, Jessica, Isaac, and myself, started to walk off. I looked behind me, and my son was by the picnic table in the boulder about 10 feet from Bob. And I said, "Are you coming with me or staying with Grandpa?" He looked at me and held up many stickers and my son and said yes and no and went back to Bob. So we went to the creek by the upper campground, 50 to 60 yards away. Isaac said we fished here and up a little more and walked back, and Jessica was at the start of it, and then we went down the creek to where it splits and goes into 2 creeks. We crossed to the middle and walked down toward the camp direction. Jessica was messing with a pole in the water. I stood next to her and looked and seemed minions that were trapped by the lower water level. I told her Goob would love to see these and turned around to go get him. There was a dead log. I walked along. When I came up the bank, I was about 20 yards from Bob and my son empty chair next to the fire. I yelled, "Where's Deorr?" To where's my son? He said, "I thought he went down to your guys and said down that way, toward the upper campground." He said, "Yes." I turned and looked. He was not around. I looked to Jessica and yelled, "We can't find Goob." She said, "What?" I repeated. I started to the upper camp and yelled, and after a few minutes, Jessica and Bob came up. Excuse me. Jessica and Bob were coming up the upper and lower camps. Jessica and I said we need to call 911. Bob said, "No, he's here. It's only been 20 minutes or so." I told Jessica I was going for help and run from my truck. I went to like Diamond in the road between the cutoff and turnaround, thinking Jesus got to be here, little. Excuse me. He can't go far. So I flipped around and I saw a drunk Missy in my. I went back to where Jessica was and said, "Did you find him?" Hoping she had. She said no, and I was crying. So I flipped back around and went a mile or so down the road and got service and called 911. They asked me to stay there in service, and we hung up. I stayed a few minutes, but my son's missing. I couldn't just stay there, so I went back to camp. We all kept searching for my son.
All right, so that was their two statements.
Yep.
And I'll show it again, but I did click over to the website, the Baby Deorr, Justice for Baby Deorr website. Just so if anybody wants to do more research on that, let me go ahead and share it again. This is the website, and it's Justice for Baby Deorr. Don't let his case stay cold. They obviously appreciate donations. And there's a story, the timeline, the way it needs to be told, the public's questions for the family. Do you have questions for Deorr's family? Backroad case notes. So they actually, right here, okay, and just so that everybody knows, there is a YouTube video out there that says the case was solved. According to law enforcement, it has not been solved. Now, that was based on the medium Donna Serafina, who did a reading, and you can go see, I can put a link as well to her channel, and you can go see the reading that she did with the grandma and Jessica. And as Donna Serafina did the reading, in her interpretation of what she was seeing psychically, she said that it was a bear. So you can see that as well. But the official justiceforbabydeorr.com website is saying a new reading has been made for Deorr, claiming his case has been solved, which has confused many. We would like to say that while this new reading that says Baby Deorr was taken and killed by a bear, that we were open to all theories and readings for Baby Deorr, but he has not been found yet. So take the solve part lightly and continue hoping for him to be found. So that's still kind of up in the air because she gave specifics of where his body could be found. So it would be solved at that point if that's what happened. Officially solved. So, and so this is just the website, and you can, look, there's a People magazine article on it, on the story. There's the parents. So, I mean, you can really dig deep on this. This is an interesting picture of mommy there flipping people off. I think, Carrie, you shared a picture with me as well that I'll share. And so there's a lot to this. We could go on forever with this story. We really could until it's solved. So let me go back to us here. So let me go back to and pull up the email again so I know where we're at. So then that was Jessica and Vernal's written statements. So we're another 37 minutes in this one, Carrie. Do we want to just like come back and do a part 3? Not right now, but like next weekend. Do you want to do part 3 and I can put these up? Or how do you want to do this?
Yeah, we can do that because I gotta go pick up my mom anyway.
Okay. So let's do that. I'll put these 2 up this week and then we'll come back next week and we'll do another 2 parts because there's a lot. I mean, we could probably work on this case for a long time, really.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been telling me this, but does that sound okay if we end this now and then we'll.
Fine.
What?
That sounds fine.
Okay. All right, cool. Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, now I'm getting even more into this because now that like we got the timeline in order and I'm seeing that, all this info and those statements. I appreciate it. So I will post these 2 this week. I'll probably post them tomorrow. I'll go through and make sure there's nothing I have to edit. And then if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Thank you. Thanks, Carrie, for all the work. You are awesome, man. I'm telling you. I know how much work it takes, and you did a really good job. So we'll keep going. I'm sure there's a lot. You can go down every rabbit hole if you're in the mood to keep coming on.
Yeah, I am. I've got a lot of stuff here.
Okay, cool. All right.
New stuff.
Yeah, I've got a whole notebook file cabinet full. So awesome. Okay. Thanks, Carrie. I will see you next week. I'll see you tomorrow at movie night if you're going to come to movie night or not. I don't know. We're doing the Cecil Hotel tomorrow night at 4 for members only. So everybody if you're a member, we do a Sunday night movie night in our Discord channel, but you have to be a paying member. That keeps my trolls away. All right, Carrie, take care. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Thank you.
I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for watching Left Undone Incomplete Investigations. I'm Kathryn. Take care. Stay safe. Stay well. And I will see you soon.